They said Dry Creek had more wind than water and more bones than luck. When Clara Jenkins stepped off the train in the winter of 1883, she brought with her a single trunk, a worn pair of boots, and a heart stitched full of hope. She was a mail-order bride, answering a man's letters with faith and a firm grip on her future. The train had hissed and sighed like an old man settling down to die. The platform was near deserted, the kind of lonely that echoed. Clara waited. 10 minutes turned to 20. The wind picked up. Snow danced like ghosts across the empty street. And still she waited. When Jed Turner finally appeared, he was more shadow than man. Broad-shouldered, wrapped in a dusted coat, and eyes like flint, cold and gray. He didn't greet her with flowers or a smile, just nodded and muttered, "Miss Jenkins." He lifted her trunk without a glance and walked off toward the wagon. It wasn't how she imagined it, but life didn't care for dreams, not out here. Later that day, behind the barn, he'd said the words that hung heavier than snow on pine. "You're not what I expected." Clara felt those words like a boot to the gut. She didn't cry, didn't plead. She just turned and walked, boots crunching across the frozen earth, back toward the station. But the train was gone, the tracks quiet. Clara had no return ticket. She didn't know a soul in town. So she sat, and she waited, not for Jedediah, not for rescue, just to catch her breath and reckon with the ache twisting in her chest. Evening crept in like a thief. Her fingers grew numb. Her eyes burned from the cold. But she stood, not 'cause she had a place to go, but because sitting in the cold wasn't the same as living. She turned her back to the tracks and walked into Dry Creek. The town wasn't much, just a clutch of wooden buildings squinting against the wind. But it was enough to start over. Again, she found a cot above the mill, traded mending for rent, and each morning, she rose before the sun, lit the fire, and stitched seams with the same fingers that had once clutched a promise made in ink. Clara had believed in second chances, but she'd learned quick, belief didn't keep you warm at night. And as the days rolled by and spring began to whisper on the wind, she started to build a new kind of life, one that didn't need a man's name to hold it steady. She didn't see Jedediah again. Not until that day. Not until the church bell rang out, midday, sharp and sudden, marking trouble. That's when he came running into the general store, breathless and bloody. And behind him followed a past too heavy to run from. Jed Turner stumbled into the general store like a man chased by devils. His coat was torn, hat gone, blood running down his cheek in a slow, stubborn line. Clara stood stock still behind the counter, a bolt of cloth half unrolled in her hands. The townsfolk froze too, all but old Eli, who spat tobacco into the stove and muttered, "Ain't seen that boy run since the barn fire of '81. Jed leaned heavy on the counter, his breath ragged, eyes wild. "Clara," he said. First time he'd spoken her name with anything close to feeling. "I need your help." Now, Clara Jenkins wasn't in the habit of offering help to men who'd turned their backs on her. But something in Jed's face stopped her cold. Not fear, not shame, desperation, the kind that sinks into a man's bones and won't let go. "What happened?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. He shook his head. "A rider, 2 miles out. She's coming for me." Clara asked, already knowing the answer wouldn't sit easy. He swallowed. "Kalista." The name hit like a hammer on stone. Kalista Crow, outlaw gambler, and the kind of woman who could slit your throat and steal your heart in the same breath. Folks said she'd once rode with Bart Pertain's gang, the same gang that had burned Clara's hometown back in '80. If Kalista was in Dry Creek, she wasn't there for pleasantries. "What did you do, Jed?" Clara asked low. He didn't answer. That was answer enough. Clara moved quick then, faster than she thought she could. Eli barred the door. "Jess, take the back and warn the sheriff." "You," she pointed to Jed. "Come with me." He followed without a word, down the narrow alley behind the store, across the muddy road, and into the boarding house she now called home. She shoved him into the back room, the one with the busted stove and the small window that looked out to the hills. "You're going to tell me everything," she said, grabbing the pistol from her top drawer. She'd bought it with her first earnings from sewing in town. and kept it oiled ever since. Start talking. What did you do to bring a woman like Kalista Crow to your door? Jed sat on the edge of the bed, his shoulders slumped. I took something, he said finally. Something she wanted more than gold. Clara's brow lifted. What could that possibly be? Jed's eyes met hers, tired and older than his years. A child. The words dropped like iron. A baby girl. Named her Rosie. She was Kalista's by blood mine too. She left her behind after a raid. Wasn't fit to raise her. I couldn't let that little girl grow up in a saloon or a jail cell. So I took her. Raised her for 2 years. Out in the hills, far from all this. And now? Clara asked. She found us. Burned the cabin. Rosie's safe. I got her to Widow Langford. But Kalista, she's coming. She wants her back. Clara stared at him. The past had a way of circling back, like wolves on a wounded steer. And this time, it hadn't just found Jed. It had come barreling into Clara's hard-earned peace too. You brought this on all of us, she said. And you didn't even warn me. Jed nodded, guilt cutting deep. I didn't think she'd follow. Well, Clara said. She did. The sound of hooves echoed faint on the wind, slow and sure. Kalista Crow had arrived. Kalista Crow rode into Dry Creek like the wind had a vendetta. Her horse was jet black, eyes wild, foam on its mouth from the hard ride. She sat tall in the saddle, wearing a long duster that billowed behind her like smoke from a burning barn. Her hat was low, her hair dark as river mud, and slung low on her hip was a Colt .44 with a pearl grip. The townsfolk scattered like dry leaves before a gale. Clara watched her from the upstairs window, jaw set. She recognized that kind of woman, the kind that had buried more than one good man and never once lost sleep over it. Jed crouched behind the curtain. She won't shoot in daylight, he said, voice low. Clara glanced at him. You sure about that? He didn't answer. Kalista dismounted slow, deliberate, and tied her reins to the hitching post in front of the saloon. She walked through the doors like she owned the place. And maybe she did. Fear had a way of handing over deeds without signature and paper. Inside, the saloon went quiet as a grave. Clara didn't wait to see what happened next. She grabbed her coat, her pistol, and strode out the door, leaving Jed behind with nothing but his regrets and a trembling heartbeat. She found Sheriff Boone outside the jailhouse, loading his old scattergun with hands that didn't shake. She's here, Clara said. I know, he answered. Heard the horse. Figure trouble's come home. Clara gave a nod. You gonna stop her? Boone snorted. Kalista Crow ain't the kind of woman you stop. She's the kind you try not to get in the way of. Well, Clara said, stepping off the boardwalk, maybe it's time somebody did. She pushed open the saloon doors, boots echoing on the warped floorboards. Kalista stood at the bar, pouring herself a drink with the ease of someone who had nothing to fear and no reason to hurry. Miss Jenkins, she said without turning. You don't look like the type to drink at noon. I ain't, Clara replied, but I do find it's a good hour to talk. Kalista turned, glass in hand. Her eyes were cold, but not cruel, just tired. Dangerous tired. The kind that comes from carrying too many sins and not enough sleep. You must be the woman he left me for, she said. Clara didn't flinch. I'm the woman he disappointed. Kalista gave a low laugh. Well, we got that in common. There was silence, heavy and long. Clara stepped closer, hand never leaving her pistol. The child, she said. You gave her up. I left her somewhere safe, Kalista snapped. Until he took her. Until he decided to play father. You came back for her. She's mine. She's better off. Kalista's jaw clenched. Her hand hovered near her hip. You really want to find out how much? The air snapped like a drawn bow. Then from outside came a sound that cut through it all. A child's cry, small and sudden. Everyone turned. Clara moved first, back through the swinging doors and into the street. There, standing beside Widow Langford's wagon, was Rosie. She'd slipped away, drawn by some thread a child couldn't name. Blood, maybe. Destiny. Kalista stepped out behind Clara, her eyes locking on the girl. Rosie stared back. big brown eyes, face smudged with dirt and wonder. Then she whispered, "Mama?" It wasn't clear who she meant. Rosie's voice floated like a prayer engine between storms. "Mama?" Kalista stood frozen, one hand on her hip, the other clenched tight around the empty whiskey glass. Clara saw it then. Not a killer, not a thief. Just a woman caught in the middle of who she used to be and who she never got to become. Jed came rushing from the alleyway, breath catching in his throat when he saw his daughter standing out there in the open. "Rosie," he called, his voice sharp with panic. The girl looked toward him, then back to Kalista. She didn't run, didn't speak again, just stared wide-eyed, heart caught between two worlds. "Rosie," Jed said softer now, kneeling in the dirt. "Come on, pumpkin. Let's get you somewhere safe." Kalista stepped forward one pace, just one, but it was enough. Boone, standing on the boardwalk, thumbed the hammer back on his shotgun. "That's far enough, ma'am." She didn't flinch. "You gonna shoot me for talking what's mine?" Boone's jaw tightened. "Not if you stand down." Clara moved slow, her body between Kalista and the child. "This ain't the way," she said, her voice low, firm. "You show up with a gun and expect the world to make room. But Rosie ain't a coin to be traded. She's a girl. She's got ears, and she's got a heart." Kallista's eyes glistened, but no tear fell. "She's my blood." "And blood," Clara replied, "don't make you a mother. Showing up when it's easy don't count for much neither." That did it. The words hit like truth often does, quiet and mean. Kallista's hand drifted from her holster, falling to her side, like an old wound reopening. Her shoulders slumped just enough for the world to see the break in her armor. "I didn't know how to be a mother," she said. "Didn't know how to hold something good without hurting it." "You do now," Clara asked, not unkindly. "I'm trying to." Just then, Rosie stepped forward, past Clara, past the sheriff's shotgun, right up to the woman in the duster. Kalista knelt slow, her breath catching. Rosie touched her face with tiny fingers, brushing dust from her cheek. "You're warm," she whispered. Kalista smiled barely. "You too, little one." Jed watched, jaw clenched, his eyes wet. Boone lowered a shotgun, and the town of Dry Creek held its breath. Finally, Kalista rose and looked Clara in the eye. "She stays," she said, "but I'll visit if you'll let me." Clara nodded. "That's between you and the girl, not me." Kalista turned, mounted her horse, and tipped her hat toward no one in particular. "You take care of her," she said. "I will," Clara answered. And just like that, Kalista Crow rode back into the dust, her silhouette swallowed by the horizon. Rosie clutched Clara's hand, small and sure. Jed stood nearby, but said nothing. There was a stillness then, the kind that comes after storms, when the air smells of promise and ash. Clara didn't know what came next, but for the first time in a long while, she didn't fear it. In the days that followed, Dry Creek tried to forget the shadow that Kalista left behind. But shadows don't care for memories, they cling. Clara knew it well. Jed stayed out of sight for a while. He worked odd jobs on the edge of town, fixing fence lines, hauling wood, saying little. Folks still talked, as folks do. But Clara had lived long enough to know words couldn't flay you unless you let 'em. Rosie slept near Clara's bed those first few nights, waking with dreams that clung to her like burrs. Clara would hold her, hum soft songs from a past that wasn't hers, and wait for sleep to take them both. She wasn't a mother, not by birth or promise, but she had the arms for it, the heart too, even if it still bore bruises. One morning, Clara found Jed sitting on the back steps of the boarding house, holding a worn leather book. It was Rosie's sketchbook, pages filled with clumsy stars, crooked trees, and stick-figure horses. "She draws better than me already," he said with a tired smile. Clara stood, arms folded, looking down at him. "She's got a steady hand. That's something." Jed nodded. "I should leave," he said, quiet as the wind. Clara didn't argue. She didn't nod either. He looked up. "But I won't." That stirred something sharp in her chest. "Why?" "Because running ain't fixin'," he said, "and I've done enough of both." She sat beside him, close but not too close. "You made a mess." "I did." You broke a promise. I know. And you brought danger to my door. Jed looked at her, those gray eyes steady now. Say the word, Clara. I'll go. But she didn't. She just stared out at the hills, where snow still lingered in patches beneath the pines. Rosie needs someone who'll be there when it matters, not just when it's easy. I will be. You better mean it. I do. The silence stretched, long and gentle. Finally, Clara stood. Then stay. But don't think that means I forgive you. Forgiveness is a thing you earn, one quiet day at a time. Jed nodded, not with relief, but with understanding. I'll be here, as long as she needs, as long as you'll let me. Clara didn't answer, but she didn't walk away either. That was answer enough. That night, over stew and lantern light, Rosie crawled into Jed's lap with her sketchbook. She drew a picture of the three of them, a crooked cabin, two big folks, and one little hand-holding girl. Underneath, in bold pencil, she wrote one word: home. Winter began to loosen its grip, bit by bit. The snow melted off the rooftops and flowed down the dirt roads in muddy rivulets. Dry Creek stirred like an old hound wakened from a nap, slow, grumbly, and never quite sure what to make of the light. Clara spent her mornings at the sewing table, mending shirts and patching trousers for half the town. Rosie played on the floor, her fingers blackened with charcoal and her tongue poking out as she sketched everything she could see: boots, cats, clouds. Jed took to help the preacher repair the church steps, then worked afternoons down by the river clearing brush for the new mill. He didn't ask for money. He didn't ask for much at all. He just worked. Hard. Quiet. Like a man trying to undo years with a hammer and sweat. Every night, they ate together, Clara, Rosie, and Jed. And every night, it got a little easier. The silence between them softened. Smiles came without shame. Then came the letter. It arrived folded in thirds, sealed with wax, and carried by a dusty rider who didn't stay long enough to water his horse. Clara read it alone at the kitchen table, her lips pressed tight. The paper trembled in her hands. What is it? Jed asked, watching from the doorway. Clara didn't speak at first. Then, with a breath that felt like it took more than it gave, she said, It's from the magistrate in Laramie. They're looking into Kalista. There's a warrant. Jed stiffened. For what? Horse thieving. Robbery. Abandonment. They want to know about Rosie. Want statements. Witnesses. Jed's voice turned sharp. They can't take her. They might try. The silence that followed was thick as molasses and just as suffocating. What do we do? He asked. Clara folded the letter, her hand steady now. We speak the truth. But, no buts. She came here, didn't shoot, didn't steal, didn't raise a hand. She left Rosie. That's something. Jed looked down. They won't care. Then we make him. Later that week, Clara rode out to Widow Langford's with Rosie in tow. They stayed for 2 nights, long enough for Clara to tell the full story to the traveling magistrate who came through town. No embellishments, no lies. Just truth. Plain and hard as fence posts. Back in Dry Creek, Jed waited. He chopped wood until his hands bled. He didn't sleep much. He didn't eat. When Clara returned, she walked into the room, dusted off her hat, and said, They ain't coming. Magistrate saw no reason to stir up what's settled. Jed exhaled like a man who'd been holding breath for years. Rosie jumped into his arms, giggling and squealing about horses and pie. But Clara just watched, because deep down, she knew something had shifted, not just with the law, but in Jed's eyes, in her own heart, in the ground they stood on. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But the river was running clear again. Spring crept into Dry Creek quiet-like, not with trumpet calls or great blossoms, but with the slow thaw of dirt roads and the soft trickle of meltwater under the eaves. The hills turned green in patches, and the breeze stopped it in quite so hard. Clara woke early most mornings, not from duty, but habit. She'd light the stove, boil water, and listen to the creak of the house as it stretched into another day. Rosie had taken to sleeping, with her sketchbook tucked under her pillow. She dreamed now, and that was new. Jed, well, he didn't say much still, but he didn't have to. He mended fences, fed chickens, and built Rosie a swing in the old oak behind the boarding house. He even laughed once. Just once. Clara didn't say nothing, but she'd remember the sound like it was carved into her. One evening near dusk, Clara found herself out by the swing, watching Rosie push herself higher and higher. Jed sat on the porch steps whittling something into shape. Turned out it was a little wooden horse, rough but kind. "She's happy," he said, nodding toward Rosie. "She's safe," Clara replied. "Because of you." Clara didn't answer right away. Her hands were in her apron pockets, thumb rubbing a threadbare corner of fabric. "I used to think safety came with walls and locks," she said. "Turns out, it comes with people who stay." Jed set the carving down. "Clara," she turned to him, and for the first time in a long while, she wasn't guarded. "You want to be here?" "With everything I am." "You ready to be a father?" "I already am. And what about me?" He stood, walked slow, and stopped just short of reaching her. "I've loved you, Clara Jenkins, since before I knew what it meant. I messed it up. I ran when I should have stayed. But I'm here now, and I ain't leaving unless you send me." She looked at him a long while, then stepped forward and placed her hand in his, weathered and warm. "I don't need promises," she said. "Just presents." He nodded. "That I got plenty of." The sun dipped low, painting the sky in streaks of fire and rose. Rosie called out, "Look, Mama, I can fly," as she soared on the swing, her legs kicking skyward. Clara and Jed watched, their hands still joined. It wasn't the life she thought she'd find when she answered that first letter, but maybe, just maybe, it was the one she was meant to have. The past hadn't disappeared. It never does. But here, in this quiet slice of Wyoming dust and wind, it no longer held the reins. And that, my friend, is how Clara Jenkins, mail-order bride, seamstress, survivor, built a home out of the pieces left behind, and found love not in the promises made, but in the ones kept.